everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. I'm your host, Nemesis, D.W. Howard, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And we're going to bring you a cult classic from the 80s today. It's a movie that didn't get a lot of love back when it first came out. I think it's taken on a cult status. It's a movie that I loved. I was surprised that my co-host loved it, and a lot of you out there loved it too. So I'm very happy about doing this movie. It's none other than Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins. And we'll talk a little bit about Remo and where he comes from and everything in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to say, make sure you click like and subscribe down below on our channel for content like this and all sorts of other content. I want to let you know also that we're on every Friday at 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, and then all around the world on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So without further ado, I'm going to bring them in. First, I'm going to bring in an artist, a wonderful human being, a sexy man, and a master of Sinanju, Mr. Jeff Bracey.
All of these things are true.
And then I'm going to bring in a writer, a teacher, an unbelievable man, and also our little father, Steve Shadewayne Sellers.
Yes, I have new fingerprints and even a new name. Yeah, I love this movie. This is one of my childhood favorites. I grew up watching this movie before I knew about any of this stuff going on, before I'd ever heard of the Destroyer novels. And yeah, it's one of those that's kind of stuck with me.
Well, okay, there's a great question just to start off the pod. How many of us here read the Destroyer novels before seeing this movie, or this movie led you to the Destroyer novels? So did anybody here read the Destroyer novels before they saw this movie?
Never even heard of it.
All right, I'm the same
I was too
way.
young.
So all of us got into them. Yeah, I mean, I read some of them. There are a ton. I can't even begin to tell you. I think there's over 100.
There's over 200 currently.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
So-
I've only read like a handful.
And it's a really cool series. I will say that before we get into the whole pod, and that many different writers have taken up Remo and his destiny and written about him over the years. So it's been almost like a crowdsourced type project, except people are getting paid, obviously. But and some of the books are not as good as others because some of the writers have had better ideas than others. But just an incredible setting, wonderful characters, really, really enjoyable. It's a shame that this movie didn't do better and take off at the box office and then lead to other things. So,
Since you introed that, I just want to say the series was originally conceived by Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir. Unfortunately, Sapir died a few years after they got started writing the books, and Murphy continued to write, but he also started inviting ghostwriters to help him with the workload because they just put out these books at an extraordinary pace. And I think it's still going on today. It's one of my life's ambitions is to collect the entire series and then read them consecutively because I've read them piecemeal throughout the decade since discovering this film. And I was able to discover this because they did a Blitz campaign where they put out the movie and they put the novel back on shelves of the first Destroyer novel.
Wow. Well, 200 plus books. You better get started. Jeez. So, real quick.
I got about half of them.
Are you serious? 100 books?
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy. All right. So I'm just going to briefly introduce this because I want to go around and let everyone talk about the plot and what's going on in this movie and what they thought of the movie versus the books and then how the story applies. But in a nutshell, and this is me just giving you a one over the world, and then I'm going to kick it out to my co-host. A government agency recruits a New York cop, and they end up faking his death so they can have him trained by a master of martial arts from Korea named Chiun. And they give the cop a new name, Remo Williams, hence the title. And he's trained by Chiun in this movie. And eventually he is tasked with taking down a corrupt and murderous industrialist who is above the law. That is the subplot in a very, very small nutshell, but there's so much more to it. And the characters really add so much more to the movie and the plot and the story. And then the books take that and run with it. So I'm going to go to Steve first because Jeff has tons of knowledge. So I want to circle back to Jeff on this. But Steve, I know that you saw this movie probably around the same time I did. So expand on all of that a little bit and what took away from it, or anything you want to hit on the plot of the movie.
Yeah, I think that covers the basics of what the story is. I will say that in terms of the actual plot itself, there are elements that are very 80s action movie. You have the evil industrialist, as you talk about. You have the action hero who's, killing all of these, thugs to get to him, and finally assassinate him, all of that. I mean, so that, that's the basics of the story. While Remo is largely under the care of Chiun, the master of Sinanju, which is considered to be the source of all martial arts. Now, keep in mind that we're not talking about like anything human in terms of martial arts. We're talking about like quasi-mystical martial arts. Think like, the Hand or the Chase from Daredevil as an example, or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's this quasi-mystical sort of martial arts where they're able to do superhuman feats. And this is the kind of martial arts that Remo learns. And I also want to point out one other character who's fairly important as well. In addition to the director of the organization called Cure, there is also an assistant who is the one that brings Remo into the organization, and his name is McCleary. And I will say, as much as this movie is going to take quite a bit of hits for not being very politically correct, the cast technically of characters is very diverse. So you have McCleary, who is this assistant who happens to be black, and he's a really great character. In addition, and then you have Chiun, who is really great. But the focus of the story is the father-son, master-apprentice dynamic between Remo and Chiun. That's where all the energy is. That's where all the fun is. That's where all the great dialogue is these two people who initially can't stand each other, learning to appreciate each other and respect each other, and then form a father-son almost like relationship by the end of the movie. And that's where the satisfaction is. That's the character growth and the character arc that Remo goes on as he starts off, being this very clueless cop, and then becomes a highly trained professional assassin in the employ of Cure. That is where I think the really good stuff is. Now, they do change some details from what I remember, and Jeff, I'm sure, is going to know more about this than I can remember because it's been a while since I've read the books. My recollection is that Remo in the books was actually sentenced falsely to death and executed, and then they replaced him, and basically that was how they covered his death.
That's accurate.
Yeah. But in this case, they just basically do a black bag job where they just, shove his police car in the East River, and then McCleary it takes him out of there and basically changes his fingerprints, in his face and his name. So, he becomes a completely different man. And by the end of the movie, he is a completely different man. Sam Edward Bacon is no more by the end, and he just becomes truly Remo Williams by the end of the movie. And I love the way that all this develops. There are a lot of funny lines. The villains are okay. I would say that they're kind of solid rather than great. They serve their purpose. But the main characters, the four main characters, mainly Remo and Chiun, but also McCleary to a lesser extent, the Wilford Brimley character, Smith. All of those are a really great cast, and you can tell that those are the characters that they lifted from the books, because those are the most interesting characters in the movie. So, yeah, I would say, from what I gather, that there are quite a few changes, but the core of what Cure is and the core of what Remo is definitely in this movie from what I can remember.
I will say, real quick before I get to Jeff, that we're going to talk about this towards the end of the show, but both Fred Ward and who plays Remo, and then Joel Grey, who plays Chiun, at some point or another, and Joel Grey, it's through the whole movie, have extensive makeup on to change the way they look. And in Fred Ward's case, it's at the beginning of the movie, and it is it's a very light touch what they did, but they did it well enough. Yes, they did it well enough that he doesn't look anything like himself, what he really looks like, which is what he looks like through the most of the movie. So a lot of credit needs to go out to the makeup department, and I'm going to mention them by name towards the end of the film, but I thought that was worth bringing up. The other thing I'll say about McCleary that I just wanted to go out say is that he really goes out like a boss, and for all of the lightheartedness and martial arts, type fun mysticism in this movie with Sinanju and everything, there are some moments that are very serious and dark, not dark in the sense that you feel like it's an existential crisis for yourself, but just the seriousness of the moment hits you. I will just mention with McCleary, he ends up killing himself because he's captured, and then lets himself be captured to let Remo get away. So even though there are the overall tone of the movie is lighter, when it needs to be, it goes down into the emotional depths where it needs to go. So.
Well, they're fighting the enemies of the system that the system can't touch. These are the 11th commandment, as they say, thou shalt not get away with it. And because you're fighting these really powerful people, like this guy who's heavily connected with the military industrial complex and is basically untouchable, he's going to have those moments, where he gets a victory occasionally against Cure. And when it does, it's hard and it's tragic, like the death of McCleary.
Yeah. And you watch this movie and it's very relevant. It still feels like something that pertains to the here and now, and it's a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that you can understand and get behind to a certain extent. So with that, I'm going to go to Jeff. What are your thoughts there, Jeff?
Okay. I'm gonna be comparing and contrasting with the books a little bit. Okay. And also for fans of the series or new fans, should this engender that in you, also be aware that Marvel Comics put out a really good series of comics based on this as well, written either by Roy Thomas or Doug Moench, I believe. And my favorite issues are the ones that have the art by Lee Weeks, who really, really gets how Remo and Chiun should look. They were my favorite artists. That was my favorite artist on the book. So there's that, and they do original stories as well as doing the plots of some of the books. So you get a mixed bag of fun there, and I think the original stuff is equally as good as anything that's in the Destroyer series itself. One of the fun things about the Destroyer series is, like you said, it's that catharsis of like the people who appear to be untouchable, be they politicians, government officials, criminals, thugs, businessmen, whoever. They all get their comeuppance, and the writers of the book are candidly aware of what's going on in the world on a level equal to the South Park guys. There's one point where they actually Cure takes on a Donald Trump stand-in called Ronald R. Rump, and that's pretty funny. There's a lot of good stuff in there like that. So you'll see them. Nice with the cover there. So you'll see that sort of thing. So like if you're a fan of pop culture, if you're a fan of things that have been going on in the world, this book series is very enjoyable to watch. To read when you do that. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff in there. And looking at the movie, it does give you that sort of timeless quality because we are currently in periods where we're seeing tremendous political strife going on around the world, and we kind of wish there was an agency like Cure that could go in there and fix things up. Now, their commandment in the movie is "Thou shalt not get away with it," but it's even more so in the book. The idea is America is the world's first representative republic democracy, the great experiment, as it's often called by Harold Smith. The problem is the great experiment has failed. But the mandate of Cure is not to let the experiment fail. And this is why secrecy is paramount. Everybody in the agency is expendable, which is why McCleary kills himself. And so with that in mind, in order to save the Constitution, they have to forego the Constitution, which is why they have assassination, which is why they work outside of the law, which is why they have this sort of organization they have, and why it's limited to, at the time, only 3 people. well, technically 4 if you count Chiun. And so the movie doesn't give you that history per se, but they give you enough of that so you really get the idea. Like, okay, this is what's going on here. I love the characters in the film. Joel Grey is absolutely magnificent as Chiun. Chiun is raging toxic masculinity at a time decades before we even knew what that word meant. I don't think anybody even invented it at the time yet. He is racist to his core. He is misogynistic like there is no tomorrow. He is superior. He is arrogant. And he is all these things because he's basically untouchable. And yet, as you follow the movie and the books, you find that this guy actually does have a heart. He is more than this collection of stereotypes and bad personality traits. He has a gentleness to his soul. The father-son relationship that develops between the two characters is truly moving. The movie does a really nice job of pacing that out in a film where a lot is happening. And so that was a real pleasure to see it develop between Ward and Grey here. And they do it without having to drag it out, but without sacrificing a lot to it too. There's just like some things, like you'll see Ward doing some training and he thinks he's doing really cool, and he keeps looking at Chiun for approval, and he's like ignoring him, and there's these quiet moments they have, and another thing that's great about Chiun that they translated from the books is like his just barb of a sense of humor. It's like, oh, Chiun, some days I really love you. He's like, oh, that's excellent. He's like, of course, I am Chiun. He's like, other days I can really kill you. And he's like, good, we will practice that after supper. It's just fantastic stuff. And it becomes that sort of thing that, like, even though the relationship is very father son, and I did love that they started to include that by the end of the film. One's calling him my son, the other one's calling him little father, which becomes their terms of endearment for them each other as the series goes on. That you see this happen, and it's not overplayed. It's done in a organic way. It's done in quiet moments, as well as just little things you see the characters doing, and it's really nice. And man, Joel Grey, even under all this makeup, can do so much with barely moving his face, just the set of his eyes and the set of his mouth. He is a real master. And if you've never seen him before this film made me an instant fan of his. And I went back and watched things like Cabaret to see what this guy was doing. But it also made me a great fan of Fred Ward. He's not everything Remo should be. Remo exudes a certain menace. It's one of the reasons he was chosen by Cure, because they briefly touch on the fact that he was a Marine recon in Vietnam. But he was extraordinarily good at killing. He was ruthless. He was lethal. But he got back in the world and became like a regular human being again. But this kind of set him apart. And but what Fred Ward does get is he gets the snarky side of Remo. He gets the charming side. He is all those things, and he is so lovable as this guy who is suddenly thrust into a world that has him wildly out of his depth. And I gotta say this, man. Like, I know Joel Grey is a fantastic physical performer. He is a professional dancer. He is a mime. He is grace personified. When you watch him move as Chiun, it's like watching people like Grace Kelly or Fred Astaire move. It's just that cat-like grace. But Fred Ward, I've got to hand it to him for stepping up and meeting the physical training demands. I wish people like maybe Robert Pattinson would take a hint from guys who are willing to put in the effort to play the character right. But yeah, he does a lot of stuff in this film by himself, and you can see that he worked really hard to do it. Like when you're watching him jump from balance beam to balance beam, swing from ropes, and I'm sure they had safety measures, but he spent a great deal of this movie dangling off a really high crap. And I know, like, I got kind of a thing with heights when it comes to stuff like that. That would have been absolutely terrifying. And he handles it like an absolute champ. So hats off to Fred Ward. Conrad McCleary, we do have a bit of a change here. We got a little bit of a race swap. Conrad McCleary is supposed to be Irish, but the actor who plays him to a T. And so, like, that never bothered me. Like, he really embodied Conrad McCleary. And you want to talk about going out like a boss? In the books, his artificial hand is a hook, and he takes himself out with the hook. Like, he just got the job done because it needed to be done. The only character who's lacking is, as far as the main crew, is Wilford Brimley. Now, Wilford Brimley is just great being Wilford Brimley. But unfortunately, he's not Harold W. Smith from the books. Harold W. Smith is whip-thin, lemony, taciturn. He's actually kind of gray. He had a little bit of a cyanosis as a kid, I believe. He's from Connecticut, so he doesn't have a bit of that kind of a southern accent to him or mannerisms. And he's a man who was chosen for the job because he lacks imagination. And so he is the ultimate guy to do this job, because in order to have this much power, you need somebody with absolutely no ambition and no imagination. And Harold Smith is that to a T. So I wish they could have got the character just right. But I do really like Wilford Brimley in the role, so I'm happy he was a part of it as well. The only thing that's really lacking are the villains. The villains they're there. And in the book series, they fight a number of human villains, everything from your typical mobsters, like I said, to industrialists, to businessmen, to heads of state. The series ramps up and never stops going once they get into it. There's a mystical mythology to Sinanju and everything that goes on, in Remo himself. So they end up fighting things like the deadly robot Mr. Goodens, the electrically charged cyborg Eliza Root. There's Shiva. There's Kali. There's Chiun's disowned nephew Nudhik, who is also a master of Sinanju. There's the Dutchman, a master of Sinanju who also has superhuman hypnotic powers. There's an Uncle Sam not Uncle Sam. There's a Walt Disney stand-in who is an evil cartoonist. The series goes off the rails, but it goes off the rails in the best way. And what they did with this film is they took the essence of it, they took the heart of it, and they made it work. Now, I would have liked to have seen a lot of super kung fu, because, Shaw Brothers has been a thing long before this. But this is a really great origin story. And for not showing me much in the way of martial arts, I really love the action of this. And the last thing I'll say is, because the set pieces, like I said, all the dangling off of high stuff, man. Fred Ward, you're a boss. I can't go without saying Kate Mulgrew is also really fantastic in her small role as a supporting character in the film. And you can kind of see where Captain Janeway came from if you watch this movie.
Absolutely. What I was going to say is you took a lot of, the specific characters. I was going to build a little bit on them and say that what is really interesting to me is some of the minor, relatively minor characters that were in this movie. So, for instance, you hit on Kate Mulgrew, who would go on to play Captain Janeway as Major Fleming. She's not a minor character, but she doesn't have a ton of screen time compared to others. But you can already see her potential there.
Yeah.
Another person, he doesn't get any screen time at all, but I thought it was just interesting. And if you're a fan of Die Hard, you'll recognize him as the cop in Die Hard. Reginald VelJohnson is in this movie.
Sergeant Al Powell.
Yeah. So, and then he would go on to be whatever that show.
My ambulance.
Yeah, whatever that show is with Urkel. I never watched it, but so he was in this. George Coe as General Watson is really, really good. I think that he pulls off the incompetent general who is corrupt and dirty really, really well. He is just clueless enough and smarmy enough that you hate him, but I don't even know how to describe it. You hate him.
He's that guy who's trying to get by till retirement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's almost like a dirtier, smarmier Colonel Klink.
Yeah.
He's like,
he's just gotten his dance dirty enough to keep his job, but not dirty enough to do what Grove does.
Yeah, exactly. And he's a useful tool. And then eventually he comes face to face with he makes bad choices and he pays the price for it. He pays the price for it. He ends up dying in one of Sinanju's glorious accidents, or beautiful accidents.
Perfect accidents.
Yeah, perfect accident. So
because the best assassination is the one that you never knew happened.
Exactly. So it's a really, really cool ending for him. Not cool for him, but cool to see that Remo, even with this limited training in Sinanju, is able to pull this off. And Chiun is just. There's one point I will say that I wanted to bring up about Chiun. There's a moment where there's a fight on the Statue of Liberty where people had found out who Remo was. They're trying to kill him. And Remo thinks he's taking care of all the people who have come to try and get rid of him. And one guy he forgot about. And I think this really goes to what Jeff was saying about, even though Chiun is very, very hard on Remo, he's sarcastic, he's biting at times. He could be cruel in his punishment, not cruel for no purpose, but his punishment to teach lessons. But he cares. And he cares because he cares about Sinanju, first of all. He doesn't want to disgrace Sinanju. But he cares about his student as well, especially as they come closer together. So Fred Ward's character, Remo, has forgotten about one of the assassins. And the assassin is, leveling a gun at him to kill him. And Fred Ward has Remo has no clue he's there. Chiun comes out of nowhere, absolutely silently, and just throws him to the side and presumably kills him. I'm sure he's dead.
Oh yeah.
And
no,
Remo kind of just looks
never wounds.
Yeah. Remo kind of just looks around and has no idea that anything happened, that anyone was there, that anyone ever was there at all, which just sums up their relationship at that point, I think, fairly well, so it's really cool.
Although it does leave you to wonder whether Remo would have dodged the bullet if he had known.
Would he have heard it?
It seems like at that point in his training, that guy was far enough away that he couldn't hear the float of his tendons or his metacarpals, as they would describe in the film. And just another a quick nod to Chiun is this is perhaps the greatest character introduction I've seen. It's on par with like the first time you see Jack Sparrow or Darth Vader. It makes such an impact the way this character is introed.
Remo does not lay a hand on him once. No. And Chiun does not hit him until the very end, where he starts pulling like just a couple of nerve strikes. That is all that he does. And just with all that, Chiun kicks his ass. Completely dominates the fight. It's not even close.
It's such a beautiful commentary on martial arts, which is often about using the opponent's power against himself, and it's a perfect demonstration of it.
Well, I think we have segued into characters, and I think this is a great time because I think this character deserves a segment all of his own. So one of the things I love about Chiun in this movie is the fact that they selected Joel Grey, who is a dancer, and I'm going to throw him up here, and then I will show what he really looks like in just a second. This is Joel Grey later in his life, what the actor really looks like, okay? No one would confuse him with a Korean master of martial arts and assassination. No one. What Joel Grey is A, he's Jennifer Grey's father, and B, he is a dancer. What that brings is just an incredible amount of grace. And so the directors worked with what they had. And there are reasons, and I don't know if I want to get into them, but there's reasons why they went with Joel Grey versus an Asian actor. But when they filmed Chiun, he is incredibly deadly, but the grace that he displays, and it goes back to what Steve and Jeff were just talking about. In the fight where Remo is trying to, they send Remo in to kill Chiun, knowing that he's going to get his ass kicked. This is his introduction to his teacher. And like you said, Remo doesn't lay a hand on him, but Chiun moves with this grace. And yeah, it's all choreographed, but still. You needed someone with Joel Grey's level of skill and grace to be able to move in that manner to make it look effortless, which is what you always want with martial arts. It's what they teach you all the time. Effortless effort. And Joel Grey, who is not a martial arts, conveys this in his performance. It's absolutely wonderful. You look at that and you think to yourself, you could have 100 years of Remo trying to hit Chiun at this moment, and he'd never touch him. There's no way.
He's so proficient at controlling his body and his movement. He makes you believe that he could actually dodge bullets. I mean, he just looks that good doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And real quick, let me just throw up.
Oh, have you got the clip?
No, I didn't prepare clips today, unfortunately, but I did want to throw up. So you just saw Joel Grey as himself, and this is Joel Grey in his makeup.
Yeah. I would not have known that he was not Asian the first time I saw him. In fact, I didn't know at all.
Yeah.
Like, I know the rest of you felt the same way about it. I mean, it's just such perfect makeup. I mean, and Joel Grey plays it so perfectly, you just would never have guessed. But maybe normally I would say, I'm not a fan of casting somebody else when when it's clearly meant to be Korean. But in this particular case, considering that they made a good faith effort, try to get an Asian actor and it didn't work, given that Joel Grey is just so good in the role, I mean, I'm willing to let it slide and forgive it. It's just he's so amazing as Chiun. I can't complain.
Yeah, he's so doggone good. I can't imagine anybody else playing it. I mean, that's the impact he had.
I will look for the clip and see if I can find one that I can throw up while you guys are talking. But what I do want you guys to note, everyone that's out there watching, what I want you to note here is, look at him. He's dodging a bullet here, and he's leaning back. This is all Joel Grey at this point, and he does it with just such effortless grace. But he does another moment where Remo tries to punch him, and Joel Grey literally bends back at the waist, almost to.
Oh yeah, he tries to hit him with like an end table.
Yeah. And
he's practically perpendicular with the floor. He bends back so far.
And the thing is none of this was CGI.
No wires.
None of this was stuntmen. None of this was wires.
All practical effects. All of it.
And it was all Joel Grey, this dancer. So yes, he's not a martial artist, but the man is incredibly limber, graceful, and the way he moves just looks deadly because of good directing, but just an incredible physical skill by this actor. And I just want to make sure I brought that up.
I must say, not only good choreography, but really well-placed shots. The movie gets the most out of its camera work.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I am going to go look for that clip, but I'm going to kick it to you guys. And, I'm going to go Jeff first on this one to talk, to add whatever you want to add about Chiun, if you have anything else you want to talk about. And if, while I'm looking for this clip real quick. So.
All right. As for Chiun, I want to express once again how good the makeup is. When you look at a film from a handful of years previous, when you look at Sean Connery and his absolutely ridiculous Japanese makeup for I Think You Only Live Twice, it was. The Bond
Funnily enough, Guy Hamilton was the director on that as well.
I didn't know that.
So he learned from his mistakes previously, is what I'm guessing.
Well, I tell you, the makeup here is so doggone flawless. There's even a moment that we were talking about pre-show where they're zoomed in on Chun's face, and you get a little insight into how he perceives the world. That he can hear the creak of your tendons. He's watching the very imperceptible twitches of your fingers. They can tell when Remo's about to fire, and that's how he dodges bullets. He's it's not like a superhuman senses where you perceive the future like a Jedi. He can just read bodies at an inhuman level, and he has the reflexes to allow him to pull off these superhuman feats. But they zoom in tight. It's a tight shot on his face, particularly around the eyes. And you can't see where the makeup begins or ends. It is such an incredible job. And if anybody out there has been a fan of special effects makeup as myself, and if you were a fan of the shows like Face Off, pulling off a race or a gender swap, even in old age, and they aged up Joel quite a bit for this movie. So they had to do two things. They had to race swap him, and they had to age him. And man, that is difficult to pull off because We know what people look like. We see them every day. We have an awareness. We've spent our whole lives looking at other people of all sorts of races and genders. So we know what that looks like. And it's really, really tough to fool somebody's eye when you do that. But this makeup was so convincing that I didn't know that this was the same guy who I'd enjoyed in the movie Cabaret with Liza Minnelli until the credits rolled at the end of the film. And I was like, what? So hats off to the FX people. I know Nim's going to get into who they are and their pedigree later. As for the character of
real quick before, because I want to go to Steve on Chiun to talk about Chiun, and they get to the other characters. I did find a clip. I will announce to everybody I'm going to show this whole clip. It's 2.5 minutes long, and the reason I can is because this movie is free on YouTube right now.
Yes, it is.
It is.
So watch this and go check the movie out on YouTube. So with your guys' permission, I'm going to show this clip right now, if you guys are up for it. All right, here we go.
Okay, now look. Let's not make any trouble for each other. All I want to do is to get out of here.
It is too late.
It's too late for that.
Look at how smoothly he stands up.
I don't want to kill you, but I will if I have to.
Look at that makeup job.
Flawless.
Chiun does absolutely nothing.
I love that bit.
I do appreciate the music in the background when they do their martial arts. It adds to the scene.
Yeah.
And when they're doing a mystical Sinanju move, there's also a certain sound effect that lets you know there's something extra in it.
Yeah.
And you can see that not only is Chiun moving really well, Fred Ward does a great job of playing the, buffoonish, thuggish type of fighter. And you see that he's totally outmatched.
And there's that sound effect right there. Whenever
and his hand moves so fast that you don't even see him strike Remo.
Now, what helps is the opening scene in the movie is we get to see Fred Ward beat up 3 guys. Now,
clearly in the background.
Yeah, there's that backbend we were talking about.
Yeah, and I will tell you all that eventually Remo will get his moves later on, and he'll get the sound effect, which kind of is a subtle way of showing you that he's increased in skill. So just finish this up real quick, and then we'll go back to you guys.
And he does some of the same moves that Chiun does here.
Yeah, he does.
I love this. Just waiting.
And then the cleric comes in to ask, what do you make of him? And he just completely goes into how Remo is deficient. He's clumsy and impetuous, and he moves like a baboon, and all of these things. But then you start to see him change a little bit towards the end, softening a little bit, especially in the eyes. And then he says, but there is a feeble glint of promise in his eyes. I believe I can do something with him.
But it's so great. The movie just continues to set itself up. And like I said, the movie opens up showing Fred Ward. Remo's a tough guy. He beats up 3 guys who are armed, barehanded. And he takes his licks while he's doing it to show he's not a Superman of any sort. But it just shows that he's a tough guy. And then you put him against this tiny little Asian man, and he gets totally wrecked. He looks clumsy, as Chiun declares him to be. in the midst of that fight. And I've really covered a lot of stuff about Chiun in my intro, but I'll just say the character that they portray here, while not 100% to the books, there's obviously things they couldn't achieve or didn't have the budget for, or maybe they're not the technology for. They apparently wanted to avoid doing wire work as much as possible. I think they were afraid of being maybe compared to Shaw Brothers in that respect, or maybe they just wanted to tell a different type of story. And even though I would like to see a book adaptation done as true as I could get, give it that Lord of the Rings treatment, I really love this film for what they do with the character. Chiun is Chiun here. And Joel Grey just embodies all of the quirks of Chiun, and just so lovingly. His heartfelt appreciation for American soap operas, which he declares, the one thing that our culture has produced that has any value in the world. The beautiful dramas that, it has family, love, honor, courage, all things that are beautiful. It's soap operas, man. But he is dialed in like 110%. The humor is there. All the really horrible aspects of his personality, the racism, the misogyny, and yet this character ends up being so charming in his own way, so lovable. And in the hands of somebody lesser, this would have failed. This would have come out stodgy. It would have come out so bad. Would have come out so over the top. So I cannot praise Joel Grey enough, but also the writers who had the guts to portray this character as he was in the books. Yeah. So yeah, Chiun, make mine Sinanju.
Steve, what about you? What do you think? I know you've already talked a little bit about, but do you have anything you wanted to add on Chiun here?
Chiun is just such an amazing character. He's easily the best character in this movie. I mean, and it's like you said, this guy, normally if this was produced today, this whole thing would never happen.
Ruined.
They would have demanded Joel Grey be canceled. They would have demanded, the writers be canceled because of how absolutely racist this guy is, and it's a race swap and all of these sort of things. And you could understand to a certain extent why they would think that, but they're just so good. And the character that we see is not just these elements. He's a father who cares about his son. He's somebody that values, things like soap operas. He's just he's charming and he's likable and he's awesome. And the thing also is that is he arrogant? Yes, but he earns the right to be arrogant because he's genuinely is as good as he thinks he is. He's a master of Sinanju. He can do things that are superhuman.
Yeah, you got to think that everything we see Remo going through, he went through at one point.
Yeah. So when he's saying that you're clumsy and pitiful, compared to him, everyone is. He's because he occupies, such a high level of martial arts, and he's constantly, improving and pushing Remo to improve. And
it's
when Remo actually does what he's supposed to do, when he fulfills a lesson, Chiun is appreciative of him, even if he might, lay into him a little bit. Yeah. What were you going to say, Jeff?
It's like if Superman asked you if you lift, bro.
Yeah.
That's the comparison.
Yeah.
I will say one of the reasons he's charming as well is that he's authentic.
Yeah.
He's authentically racist because to him, the Koreans and Sinanju, which is also his village, are the ones who came up with this martial art. How could there be anything more perfect in the world than the Korean who came up with Sinanju?
Yeah.
And even his misogyny. Okay, that's not reflected in his martial art and everything, but his misogyny is.
It's very cultural.
Yeah. It's cultural.
Well, one, it's cultural, and two, in that he is utterly devoted to his martial art, and so women are a distraction. So much so that in order to make the courting of women take the least amount of time, Sinanju has a whole series of martial art techniques on how to seduce women and pleasure them.
Lesson number 36.
I can't help but wonder if Quentin Tarantino is a fan of this film, because when you look at the relationship between the bride and what was his name?
Pai Mei has a lot of Chiun in him. I would agree.
He is 100% Chiun. I mean, like, it is the racism, the misogyny, all of that's there. But he's training this woman in a mystical martial art because your average dude can't jump up on a sword and sit there.
Yeah, I actually said, like in the chat that Pai Mei wishes he was as cool as Chiun.
Yes.
Because Pai Mei, I mean, Pai Mei is an awesome character as well, but he's somebody who's he's brutal. He's not very likable. Chiun does all these things, but he's incredibly charming. He's likable, and he has amazing lines. His dialogue and his wit are stratospheric. He's just a great character.
Yeah, and I think if I could sit one person down with an open mind to show them a character who has character traits which are not good. They are unlikable character traits, but then show them the whole character, the totality of the character arc, who they are, what they do, and then challenge them. It's like, okay, yes, the man is flawed, but he's likable. I mean, look at him. You can be flawed and likable at the same time,
And if I could point out one last thing, oftentimes as fans of like very long-running IPs, we get on gender swaps, race swaps, that sort of thing. We are generally find it unpalatable for a number of reasons. But here we have two characters. One is race swapped, and the other one, an actor, is race swapped for the role, and yet. Here's the thing out there, all you people getting into this media, making these things. If you do it well, if you make characters we can relate to, if you make characters that we like, that we root for, we don't care. I don't care that Joel Grey was playing Chiun. I don't care that McCleary ended up being played by a black actor. I don't care. I love this movie, and I love all the characters in it because they did it well. They did it with heart and passion and soul, and it's all on the screen for you to see.
And it was a diverse cast before it was cool.
Yeah.
We have spent a lot of time on Chiun, but rightly so, I think. But I will say real quickly, I think to add to your last comment just now, the other thing is that the race swap or the race swap within the character, whatever, was not done for the sole purpose of race swapping.
Exactly.
It was done because the person they selected, they thought was the best person to play the role.
We hear people saying that, but we know for a fact, unfortunately, that's not often the case these days. They try to make that argument, but it's a hollow argument.
And it's another case of another 80s actor that was race swapped similarly, and that was the woman who played Vasquez in Aliens. I thought that she was Hispanic until they showed her without the makeup, and I was like, "What? That was her?" And they did it well, and she pulled it off very well, and you would never have guessed that she wasn't, and it doesn't bother you watching the movie. That's
also check her out in the film Near Dark if you've never seen that.
Yeah, she was also in Terminator 2 as John's foster mother.
Tiny role. Near Dark's much better.
I know that character.
But most people remember that one.
I didn't even realize that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've spent a lot of time, and I do want to talk a little bit about all of the extraneous stuff outside of cast and the story. But like we said, Chiun is the character in this. Remo is huge, but Chiun is the character. But I want to go around to you guys and let you, talk about any other characters that stand out. Real quick, I just want to point out once again, Kate Mulgrew as Major Fleming. She has such a sense of authority as the officer here when she plays it, but also a femininity and a vulnerability about her. So she plays a strong female character who is a female. She is a quasi love interest of Remo, I guess you could say, but she is not a damsel in distress. She's not a femme fatale here. She's strong, standing up to authority. She's a whistleblower. I think this character was very much ahead of her time. And I think I forget if it was Jeff or Steve who said it, but I think you can definitely see the genesis of Captain Janeway in this character, because you could see Captain Fleming becoming Janeway in Voyager. So
And I can see some producers seeing this movie and thinking about, like, who do we need for the captain? And that one lady.
yeah,
Yeah, and and at the time she was the second choice for Janeway because the original choice had bowed out after filming some
Oh
scenes
yeah,
after a
yeah.
while. Yeah, so they probably needed somebody at short notice, and somebody probably pointed out, hey, if you want somebody who can play a convincing military officer, look at Kate Mulgrew, and sure enough, she was very good in the role.
yeah. And I'll just add that a lot of times, not everybody does this, but you hear it enough that it sticks with you. You hear this shtick out there that the 80s were the times of the Neanderthals when the toxic male was roaming around and everything was a horrible time for anybody who wasn't white and male. And in my opinion, that's just not true. And I think you can see the evidence of that in movies a lot of times. Was there work to be done as far as getting even more stories told and more actors and actresses in? Of course there was. There always is going to be work to be done to improve stuff. But you look at the way these characters are told, you look at what's going on here, none of this came out of, none of what a lot of people trumpet today, however you feel about it, came out of the blue in 2005.
Yeah.
It's been going on for a long time, just the same way as now people talk about, oh, it's so wonderful that we finally have female action hero leads. It's like there have been female action hero leads forever.
Ellen Ripley, Sarah Connor.
Yeah. Well, go back. I mean, this isn't the greatest example as far because of zip that, take away the commentary, go all the way back to the 60s and Barbarella.
Yeah.
So she's actually playing on her sexiness, but she is a female action hero lead in a movie, and it was an incredibly popular and successful movie. So
we ought to do that.
Might be a movie to cover one day. Who knows?
Yeah, we ought to cover that film.
Yeah. So that's me on Captain Janeway. Captain Major Fleming. I'm gonna go to Jeff next. I'm gonna end up with Steve. So
Okay.
Jeff,
I think I've said more than enough about Fred Ward. I think he's so great in the role. So I'm going to go to another smaller character. I'm going to go with J.A. Preston as Conrad McCleary. Now, Conrad McCleary in the books is a smartass, and he's an alcoholic. Again, playing on stereotypes. In the books, he's an Irishman, and so this was just what the book series is built on a lot of tropes, and it maintains that throughout the entire series. Every one of the 100 books that I've read, but it also evolves and goes in new directions. So it's not static or stale or stationary by any means. But Preston here gives Conrad something that the book Conrad doesn't have. He's got some style to him. This guy is smooth. He's cleverly witted. They have this, one of my favorite lines in the movie is Remo getting his name. Now, in the books, he was always named Remo. They did do surgeries on his face throughout the continuity of the series to change his looks every 5-10 years or so. But his name was always Remo. He is an Italian from New York, and they just gave him the last name Williams, the most un-Italian thing you could give him. But so Conrad is looking at a bedpan of all things, and it seems like it's it's like, oh, made by the Williams Company, like its address is Remo Street, blah blah blah, and it's like, yeah, your name now is Remo Williams. He puts down the bedpan. A lot of thought went into it. It's just he's like that throughout the film. You feel his gravitas, his seriousness. He's always on top of whatever Remo's trying to do while he's trying to escape the circumstance he's in. But he's always a step ahead of him, and he does it with such charm and style. You feel like he kind of comes off as like Roger Moore as James Bond. He has that kind of savoir-faire about him, and so he's this super enjoyable character. So when he does have to kill himself at the end because he's wounded and he's captured and he can't let the secrets out, you really feel it. You feel it right along with the other characters when they suffer this loss. And so he's a very memorable part of the film, even though he's not the headliner.
The one thing I'm going to add on, his death and that whole scene or series of scenes in that setting is that he ends up stopping these attack dogs. These I guess
Yeah.
they were
Dobermans.
Yeah, Dobermans. But there is a whole scene or a series there where these Dobermans are doing these incredible acrobatic tricks, jumping on, walking across ladders and jumping up and pulling down fire escape ladders and stuff like that, which really kind of lightens the moment, but doesn't take away from the eventual death scene and everything else, and everything else that went with it.
It doesn't take away from the threat of the attack dogs at all.
Yeah.
But it's funny because, like, if this was the books, I'd probably hear that, like, these dogs went through some super conditioning or they were genetically modified. We don't get any of that here, but it's so astounding to see these animals do all these things that you just kind of buy into it.
Yeah.
They're really well trained. Although I will say my brother's dog is able to open doors by himself. So I don't find it so unbelievable.
You better learn Sinanju over there, Steve.
Yeah.
So, all right. So to Steve then, what do you got there?
Yeah. On McCleary, I will say, like, I love how smooth and suave he is. I have a feeling that I probably would have liked this version more than the version in the books, because I feel like, the fact that he is so suave and he has, definite snarky moments, very, very witty lines. Like, when Remo's like, what have you done to me? Why have you changed my face? And his response was, you were ugly. Just very simple shutdowns like that, and then he comes after Remo tries to break out of the hospital and steals the ambulance. He thinks he's gotten away, and then you see the gun gradually appear on frame right behind Remo's head, and you see McCleary come into view. I mean, that is the kind of badass he is from the start, and you just end up liking that character, the whole way through. And then by the time he dies, it's like, oh my God, why did he have to die? Because you like him so much by that point.
I will say he is more likable than the character in the books.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
McCleary, I would say, for me, is almost in this movie is almost a combination of James Bond, like Jeff said, and Shaft.
Yeah,
that would not surprise me. Yeah, so the director directed 4 James Bond films, so I would not be surprised if there was an element. Yeah, play McCleary a little bit like Bond, and he just kind of went along with it. But the actor did such an amazing job in it, and I can't imagine him any other way now. He was really that great. Yeah, and I think beyond that, I'll talk a little bit about Grove, since we haven't talked about him. I kind of feel like the villains were just kind of there, and they were just sort of there to move the plot. Okay, yeah, let's find out about this guy. You learn little bits and pieces about him. You find out that he had a cop murdered, after he started digging too close to his operations, and then he murdered the 3 witnesses, including a kid who saw the murder of the officer. You see little bits of that, but you don't really get a sense of what Grove's actual goals are. You don't see what his motivations are beyond just covering up what he's doing and just maybe making a bunch of money off of a fake weapon program that he was involved in, and maybe it just seemed like a lot of it was financial fraud. But you never really get the sense beyond certain moments of menace, what he is, and that's kind of a shame. But I will say the one thing that kind of redeems Grove is that the actor who plays him, I want to say it was Charles Ciaffi. I'm just kind of going by memory off the top of my head. That guy played him well. He had a lot of charisma. Yeah,
that is who it was. So
okay, Charles Ciaffi then. Okay, that guy had a lot of charisma. He was, he had the physical presence. He had the presence in the voice. To make that character stand out. So when you have the mission at Mount Promise and they're doing the debriefing, the minute that this actor opens his mouth and says, "What do you think?" When asked, "Hey, well, should we open fire on this guy?" What do you think? Our national security is at risk here. He has such an understated tone of menace that it really, really works. And so even though the writing doesn't give Grove that much, to work with, the actor makes you believe he's Grove, and the actor makes you believe that this guy is a sleazy millionaire industrialist, and that really, I think, elevates the character beyond what he is in the script, and that's what you want from a really good actor. So I will say that the villains mostly were not that memorable beyond certain visual elements. There was Stone, who had the Tiffany tooth. I did kind of like that visual element. And then you actually have Remo carving out the glass with a Tiffany tooth, which I just thought was great. And then finally Remo punching him in his face through the gas mask. Those kinds of moments. He's just a guy that is an obstacle. He's an annoyance. But when Remo beats him, it's satisfying, and that's
because that guy's made a career out of playing heavy. So he's that guy we like to see get it in the end.
Yeah.
Right, and that makes up for deficiencies in the script is the fact that these actors and just the way that they play the roles overcome a lot of the issues. But I would say in terms of characters that stood out, it was it was pretty much the main guys. It was Fred Ward as Remo. It was Preston as McCleary, and it was Joel Grey as Chiun, no question.
I couldn't help but notice one thing about Stone is he actually kicks better than Remo. He does a nice inside crescent kick to Fred Ward's face, and it's fast and it's snappy.
I will say, if I have one criticism about this movie is really one long training montage that has a little bit of plot wrapped around it.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
But
Grove did need a bit of the Bond villain treatment, but
Yeah. And there are kind of moments where you're sort of wondering, hey, how did they find Remo at the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah.
How did they know he was going to be there? You have little things like that, but it's you don't really care because it's okay, we know that Grove has access to ridiculous resources.
Yeah.
You can justify it, and the scene at the Statue of Liberty is so good. It's I don't care.
Yeah. Before we move to the very last segment, I will just say I want to give one more shout out. We did talk about this character a little bit, but I want to give one more shout out to Wilford Brimley as Harold Smith. Just absolutely wonderful. His down homesy, I don't know even know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
He's pretty folksy, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Folksy, that's a great word. Steve, set me straight. His folksy way of delivering his lines, his nonchalance with talking about very serious things just feels quintessential American. I don't know how else to put it. And he does this in other things as well. I always remember this character most from The Thing, but this is second right here, this movie, right? And so it's absolutely wonderful just to watch him work and talk. And you get this, you really do believe him in the role. And I enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah, as much as I would
get some
like
good lines as well.
Yeah, as much as I would have liked to have seen the actual Smith from the books, that super straight lace, stick up your butt, just do it by the numbers kind of guy who's in a business where he's can't do it by the numbers. Wilford Brimley is, like you said, that kind of nonchalance folksiness about him when he's dealing with ideas, like assassination and national security. He sells it.
He looks like a middle manager physically, and the way he kind of plays some of the lines, hell, I could, see your temperature and your ass in that chair if you really want to know. He gets lines like that, and the way he delivers it just, kind of makes it funny. But he also has, moments where he's understated but powerful. Are you telling me we can't stop him? You can stop him, son.
And
but it has so much conviction behind it.
Perhaps
understated conviction.
Perhaps that's why they went with Brimley, because Harold Smith in the books, there's nothing funny about him.
Yeah.
Nothing at all. But when you, perhaps that would have been too stale when you compare him with Chiun and Remo and McCleary. So there's all right, let's bring his personality up a little bit.
I will also say, from an acting standpoint, one of the things that Brimley does, and I definitely remember him doing it in The Thing in this movie, is he's got a certain expression when he wants to convey seriousness.
When he's thinking about stuff.
And thought and thinking about something serious. Yeah, where he does this thing with his mouth and the beard and the way his mustache moves. It's so effective. I don't know what it is. I'm not an actor by training. All I know is that when I look at it, I immediately get that emotion, whether he says anything or not. So it's really impressive. It's, if you're an aspiring actor, it's worth watching that just to see it, so
it's like the subtle things that actors do that always just grab my attention more than anything else.
modulation of tone of voice, just the way this expression is, things like that. And Brimley's got it, definitely.
Yeah. So real quick before we wrap all this up, I'm going to talk about something that was outside of character and story. And if the guys want to chime in on this or add something else that they wanted to talk about, that's cool as well. One of the things that really impresses me was the makeup work. And I'm going to steal something from Jeff a little bit, but I think it is very relevant, which is you saw Joel Grey, that close-up of him as Chiun, as a Korean. I'm not going to steal from Jeff. I'm going to just do a wink and a nod at it. There is another character that was done very badly a few years before this. And if Jeff wants to talk about it, he can. But I think that the makeup artists really deserve a shout out for how well they did this, how well they did Remo, and just the makeup throughout the entire movie. We don't give enough credit to these people sometimes. And I think when they do a good job, you don't notice it, but it makes the believability of the movie and your enjoyment of the movie that much greater. So the three makeup artists on the film were Carl Fullerton, who was also famous for doing The Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia.
Nice.
Then you had, Elvira Oropeza, who also worked on Predator and Rambo, the second one. The Rambo, so First Blood Part 2. And then the third one was Mickey Scott, who worked on The Big Chill, Mermaids, and The Money Pit. So,
well, these guys didn't get Academy Awards later. They should have for this movie.
Yeah. So, I thought it was definitely worth mentioning them because I thought that they did an incredible job. And a movie is a production that takes everybody working as a team. And if one person falls down, the whole project suffers. And if Lance was here, I'm sure he'd say the same thing. So I think they did an incredible job because I think if Chiun had looked bad, we would not remember that character as fondly.
No.
So
that would have been something glaring that we talked about to this day.
Yeah.
What a bad decision that was. But when I look at that makeup, and especially that tight shot on his face, and when I think that these guys did not get an Academy Award for this job, and then later the person who gave Salma Hayek a unibrow and Frida did, I'm like, what the hell is going on here, man? Come on. This is just brilliant work. I mean, brilliant work. I don't think I've seen a swap of a character that good until perhaps Tilda Swinton in the remake of Suspiria, where one of the characters she plays is a very old man. And the makeup in there is right up there with what I see here, and even better because they have better materials to work with at that point.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, sometimes doing so good a job that you can't notice that anything was done at all maybe affects you negatively, but
it's possible.
You should be respected for the job you did. Steve, anything that you want to add on that or anything else? So.
Not a whole lot. I mean, I would say, yeah, the makeup was really good, and the special effects were very, very good for being very practical effects. And I really love that, here you have this guy that came along, was known for doing 4 James Bond movies, and, came in and did this. And while taking a little bit from that, learned for his craft, became better at doing and making, overcoming mistakes that he made on the James Bond films. And overall made a very solid looking movie. And one that I think is really, really held up. But I really love the scriptwriter. I think the scriptwriter was very clever. I think everybody gets a lot of really great lines. So much of it is quotable. I mean, I'm quoting like half of the movie just talking about it in this review. So the fact that I remember all this dialogue, goes a long way towards how memorable it is. I mean, just everything is together. I mean, not that it's a completely flawless movie. There are certain story elements you kind of look back and say, okay, that doesn't quite work, or, what's going on with the villains or whatnot, but you just don't care because this is like a movie that makes you feel good at the end of the day because you love these characters. The good guys, win after a long struggle, they earn their victory. You end up rooting for Remo and Chiun to be a family. You have all of this, and it ends just on this note, and on the note where you get to see like one of the most amazing end sequences with Chiun running on water to get to the boat. And it's just like after Lily kind of hinting at this, with Remo running on concrete, and you see Chiun going out, being a badass, and that's the right way to end the movie.
Wet concrete. He wasn't just running on a basketball court.
Right.
So it was wet concrete.
Yeah, it was wet concrete. They were still mixing it.
For everybody who hasn't seen the movie, going, okay, I could run on concrete too. It's like, no, you couldn't run on this concrete. So
no.
One
of the villains actually dies dropping into it.
Yeah.
And just I don't know who the actor is because it's just a bit player, but the construction worker they focus on for the reaction of watching.
He looks sad.
Watching Judo Gene LaBelle sink into the concrete after Ramos just ran across it.
Yeah,
and that construction worker on the side, he just looks so sad. Like, oh my God, what have I just seen?
That's like the best bit player I think I've ever seen.
Yes, he was amazing. Yeah, I too bad I don't know who he is. He was awesome in that one shot.
It was absolutely outstanding. I was going to say something real quick. Jeff, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up. So,
I think we've said it and done it all within the time frame we've allowed ourselves. So I just want to throw out one more favorite quote. Lesson 22, blessed silence.
Yes.
If you've seen the movie, you know the scene I'm talking about.
Yes. Oh, my God. It's like, I've had a little trouble remembering everything. I'm for everybody out there, I'm operating on 3 hours sleep. Not that that's an excuse, but still, even with that, it's just, you watch the movie and it just makes you happy every time. It's one of those movies like we talked about last week with Ivan Reitman. It makes us smile. It's quotable. It's just enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's like, and you can watch it and just enjoy it for what it is, or you can watch it and analyze it versus the book. There's so many ways that you can watch it, but it's just fun to watch. It's just fun to watch. So I will leave it at that. So with that, thank you, everybody. We've got a whole slate of movies. I know we had talked about doing Blade Runner, but we did Ivan Reitman last week. And so we are going to move on with some other movies. We're going to get together a whole grid, and I hope to get those out for you. And we hope maybe to get some guests as well for some of those movies going forward in the future. But we have got a lot of big things planned for you this year. So please come see us every Friday at 4. If you don't catch 4 Pacific, if you don't catch us live, catch our replay, our on demand on YouTube. Watch us there. If you have movies that you want to see, drop us a line. We will definitely fit those in. This is we're doing this show, but this show is for all of you who are watching. So on behalf of all my Cinema Crusaders, I'm going to say goodbye, and then let my Cinema Crusaders say goodbye as well, and we'll be out of here. Jeff?
Like a duck mating.
Yeah.
I'll say that down is easy until you cut off the lights anyway.
Exactly. So on behalf on all of us, you guys have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you on the other side.